All right, let me rephrase that. We've had a year of pandemic, a little bit more than right now, in this lockdown, things like that. And so, um, what does the Bible say about the anxiety? Let me make sure I've got this right. The anxiety that rises or comes during that kind of a time. The Bible, I don't remember any time in the Bible where it talked about a virus lasting for a year and a half of this and you had to get vaccinations. That's a later development. However, we certainly have times in the Bible where people were uh, sick, where things were not going well, and where people were nervous about these sorts of things. You have it with in the Old Testament with the children of God. They were waiting for the promises of God to take place, and yet they weren't there yet. And so, what do they do with this time when things are going bad? And this anxiety can rise, this fears can rise. And so much of the Bible actually talks about whether how we should fear. I think that's one of the biggest questions that maybe we can deal with in a moment here, and not that we'll fix it in any of our lives in a moment. But I think one of the key things that we can consider for us personally, when anxiety rises, when stress rises, is to take a deeper look inside. That all of those things in our lives are secondary. And what I mean by that is that there's a cause for those things in our life. And so when those stress begins to rise, when anxiety begins to rise, and you and I feel this, when we begin to be angry sometimes, or when we don't be able to control our emotions, those are indicators in our lives that there is something deeper happening. And what we need to do is take the moment, and this can be difficult. And that's why I find it so helpful to have people that I can talk to. Some of the people in this room actually are helpful for me, but I've talked to counselors and mentors because I need help sometimes even evaluating these things in my own life. But what's happening there is that we're taking a look a little bit deeper down. What is it really that's causing this situation? Because, and maybe you've seen this, I've watched people in the same situation have two different reactions. I've watched people walk through horrible things in their life and yet have joy and yet have peace. And I've watched other people who have walked through times that comparably are not all that tough, and yet they seem to be really captive by the fears and the anxiety and the stress, and they don't seem to be able to control it. And what's going on there? Why can we have a similar situation or difficult situations and two different reactions? And I think this is a part of it for us as believers, as followers of Jesus Christ, is that we have to ask the question, what is the biggest thing in my life? What is it that is kind of controlling part of my life? Because when the Bible talks about do not fear, it's not talking about that suddenly if you follow Jesus, there's no more threats in your life. That everything's good, that if you'll just follow him, everything will turn out right. You'll be wealthy, you'll be healthy, everything will be fine. You have nothing to worry about. That's not what the Bible says. The Bible doesn't teach that at all. In fact, if you look at the people who were the faithful followers of God, they ran into some of the hardest and most difficult times. They had some of the most horrible endings to their life, in fact, and yet they were faithful to God. So this is not a question of if you're faithful, then everything works out. So what's going on in that case? And I think it is a question of what is the controlling presence in my life? Is it that if I am not in control, if the things around me seem to be getting worse and worse, that things rise, that stress rises? Or can I say, you know what? I recognize that I have a level of anxiety here. And I need to look a little deeper and say, what is it in my life then that is really causing that? Is it fears? Is it fear of my own life? Is it fear what might happen to my family? Is it fear that I might lose my job? Those are real concerns, but are they controlling things in our life? Or can we have peace in uncertainty because we trust in someone that is bigger than all of that? That's where I find that I see people who can come into those times, recognize, be real, be honest. I have faced it. Times where fear has controlled my life, and I have to go down and I have to say, what is it that's causing the fear? And then I have to say, and I have to bring that and say, okay, in my life right now, this thing, this fear is bigger than God. How did I let that happen? How did that get big? No, God is much, much bigger if I trust in Him. The Bible is extreme sometimes in the language it uses. Paul writes, and Jesus talks about it. He says, the worst thing that can happen to us, isn't that bad if you have hope in God? It's not that it's not horrible. It's just that we have hope that goes beyond. And so I would say, recognize the reality of the situation, the stress and the anxiety, but allow yourself to take the deeper look, not just the emotions that you feel. You're going to have to pull back, get some help if you need it from someone else. Talk to someone here in the church or somewhere else to be able to help us process what's deeper, what's causing it. And then we need to be able to address that issue, because if there's an understanding that our hope in the promises of God and in His word and in His control is bigger, you're going to have a calmness that's going to come no matter what the situation is. And you might say, Matt, that sounds like fantasy. And I'm just going to tell you from someone who was crippled by fear at times in my life. That's been my experience, not just what the Bible says, although it is what the Bible says. True to the scriptures, but it's true to life too.